This year's exhibition is called Karl Lagerfeld, A Line of Beauty, and it's a celebration of Karl's extraordinary career. His career spans 65 years. Karl would often say he was four people, that he was one person at Chanel, one person at Fendi, one person at his own label, and one person at Chloe. And to an extent, that's true. Fendi, it was more of his modernist tendencies. At Chloe, he's more romantic. At Karl Lagerfeld is more minimalist, and I suppose at Chanel, more of his historicist and postmodernist sensibilities. So to an extent, that was true, but I think that themes transcended all of those houses. What was remarkable about Karl was that he was able to navigate all these different houses, sometimes simultaneously, to create relatively distinct aesthetics for those particular brands. So he was the ultimate chameleon.
We met at one of his parties that he would throw in his sort of 18th century house in Paris. He would throw these enormous fashion parties, and the great and good and everybody and the bad all came, and it was fantastic, and I met him there. And then I went on meeting him, and in '96, I started working at Chanel.
The very first time I met Karl was in 2004, actually. He was extraordinary. I think what struck me the most was obviously his intelligence and his knowledge, but also how confident he was.
When I first met Karl, I was doing a student job, and I was 15 years old, and I didn't know who he was at all. Yeah, my role at the beginning with Karl was only to be like a bodyguard. But with the time, he became more of course, I was his private secretary, I would say, and his personal assistant.
I think actually working and being a friend of Karl, there wasn't really a difference. Karl loved his work. That was his life. He gave everything to work, and that was his happy place. And there was no division and no holidays. He made working the most glorious, inspiring, revelatory time.
Yes, we have these three here, which will keep everything in place. So one thing that I noticed with Karl's work is that across the different brands, across the different time periods, there was a fairly strong shoulder. There was also a really kind of angular line along the tailored jackets from the shoulder into the kind of chest area. And the finishes, it's been a treat to see everything on the inside, and something that many people don't get to see.
We wanted to focus more on Karl the designer, so less his words and more his works. And we honed in on his creative process, and particularly his sketching. So the drawing was a sort of a mix between a technical drawing and an expressionistic fashion illustration.
For me, Karl was like a genius. He was drawing like crazy, like a machine. He can start to make 20 dresses in 2-3 hours,
He always said he was part of the working class, meaning that he worked all day and all night, and I don't know how he achieved what he did. It was just extraordinary. So that was the biggest challenge, was trying to do him justice, do a man of such extraordinary productivity justice.
Karl didn't have hobbies. The thing he loved most of all was to work, and that meant to sketch and to fit.
The sketches were almost like love letters. They had this secret language, this private language that only the premiers could decipher and then translate and decode into a garment. So it's so nice to have Karl's very first design represented in the exhibition, just as a toile, but nevertheless, it's a very accurate rendition of what his first design was. So I think that's also very moving. And at the time, we also found a letter that Karl wrote to his mother just after he won the Walmart Prize. He left the prize, came back home on his own, had supper at 8 o'clock, and wrote this 8-page letter to his mother that was really moving and talking about his experience and the joy and the pride that he had in winning the prize. But you also hear his personality and his humor and his wit that became so much associated with Karl.
Well, I wish I was there with Karl and his mother looking at the River Elbe in Hamburg when she said to him, you know, there is the gateway to other worlds. I mean, you should go. And I think Karl always, you know, from the very moment he saw that 18th century painting with Frederick and Voltaire, literally as a child, which he kept all his life, he had a yearning to be in Paris.
I will say like it's my village. The Seventh, near to the Église Saint-Germain, is the place that I was the most during like 20 years. Because we were doing so many things in like a circle of like 2 kilometers, 1 kilometer, I will say.
Well, Karl really loved, he loved Paris, and he loved Paris in June because he said the air was like silk, and he used to love just strolling a flânerie through Paris, through Saint-Germain. But his favorite place that he would always gravitate to would be the Café Floor. Let's go to the floor.
We were like coming here like not every day, but like 4 or 5 days a week. Karl was coming here since the 60s.
And there's one particular silhouette that he would return to again and again and again, which we call the Schlemmerian silhouette, which is based after Oskar Schlemmer, the Bauhaus artist, which was a very, very broad shoulder and nipped in waist and wider hips. And it's something you see across all of the different design houses. And I think that the areas of the body that he was obsessed with the shoulders and also just the top of the ribcage. He always wanted to make it as narrow as possible. And I think that was partly to do with youthfulness. I think he felt that having this very narrow ribcage gave him a sort of sense of youthfulness.
It's one of the wedding dresses selected for the exhibition. Get that down to me.
And I just want to check that we have the new underskirt prepared.
I don't know if Karl intended to create a sort of cipher of himself. He often was delighted at this cartoon of himself, or this dolly that he had constructed by virtue of what he wore and his powdered white hair in the ponytail, the dark glasses.
Karl became this sort of icon. He became a sort of rock star. And he developed this sort of look that he called the dolly, or the puppet, and that ossified around the early 2000s, which was the black and white uniform that he created with the high collar and the cravat and the chrome hearts jewelry. And I think people very much sort of see that side of Karl, and they think that's Karl. And for me, that was just a sort of disguise. It was a way of allowing him, in a way, to pass incognito on the world stage. So these dualities that I think show the sort of contradictory sides of Karl: masculine, feminine, romantic, military, historical, futuristic. So I hope that when people walk through the exhibition and they see these dualities and these contradictions, they get a better sense of Karl, who he really was, as opposed to the image and the myth of Karl. But I think Karl was extraordinary. He was 3 things. He was a total designer. So he, made furs, he made dresses, he made suits, he made handbags, he made shoes, he did makeup. He was somebody who did interiors and photography. He wrote books, he directed plays. But I think ultimately, what Karl's legacy will be is this sort of fashion designer impresario who was able to marry art and business, which has really become the sort of model for contemporary fashion. He always wanted to be relevant, and he never wanted to look back. I think he did look back. I think he was actually deeply nostalgic, and I think he looked back, but he would never admit it. I think that what kept him so relevant was his curiosity, his intelligence, but also his sort of open-mindedness. He would take inspiration from anywhere, from a green sweater in the street, or from art, or from film, or from literature. So he wasn't a snob. Well, he was a snob. He was a democratic snob.
What made Karl unique was his enormous knowledge and his joy in absolutely dancing with every historical and cultural reference, making extraordinary and original and unique combinations.
I know, I think it was such a radical transformation of the classic Chanel suit with the miniskirt. And Chanel always hated the knees, didn't she? This year we were fortunate to work with Tadeu Ando, the architect who designed the exhibition. Tadeu and Karl were great friends, had a lot of respect and admiration for each other, and Tadeu actually designed a house for Karl that never got built. So I think it's just so poetic that he can now live in a house that Tadeu built.